and welcome to this episode of Feminist Coffee Talks with our special guest, Gournaris. And today we also have with us interpreters Chris and Christina from the Interpreting Center at Western Oregon University. So thank you all so much for being here with us today. To begin, I was hoping, Kara, you could share your name, pronouns, and your role at Western Oregon.
Sure. Well, my name is Gournaris, and people do call me Kara, or they call me Dr. G, just depending on who I'm talking to. I am an instructor, an associate instructor here at Western Oregon University. I've been here for 12 years, and I don't use pronouns in American Sign Language. However, in English, they would be she, her, and hers. In American Sign Language, pronouns are really just created by pointing to a person. So, but generally in spoken English, it would be she, her, hers.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I didn't know that, so that's very interesting, and thank you for sharing. To begin, so we were wondering about how you identify in terms of, we've heard of deaf with a capital D versus deaf with a lowercase d versus then hard of hearing. And just for those who might not be familiar with those terms, would you mind explaining the difference between those and then how you identify yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Well, to start, if it's a lowercase d, that typically would be for someone who doesn't ascribe to the culture, to deaf culture, who doesn't use American Sign Language necessarily, who isn't part of the community. It actually connotes a much more medical, pathological view of being deaf. And it has a lot to do with identity development as well. So, for example, someone who might have grown up who was hearing and then gradually became deaf later on, they might be lowercase d. But through their own identity development, they might later learn the language and then ascribe to the community, and that might be a capital D. Hard of hearing is someone who might have a foot in both worlds, possibly, and that's a very challenging place to be. Just feeling as though one isn't 100% in either world, the deaf world or the hearing world. However, there are some who are very adept at navigating both worlds, and some are very accepting of it, and then there are others who aren't as accepting. But then when you're capital D deaf, that's someone who strongly feels in communion with the deaf culture, with the community, who might have attended a residential school for the deaf, who uses American Sign Language, who might have gone to college at Gallaudet University. So those are some characteristics of those who are big D deaf. That's what we refer to it as in sign language. I myself, I would identify as someone who's big D deaf. I grew up with a deaf family, so I'm only second generation, so it's not like there's too much history in my family of those who are deaf, but both of my parents went to residential schools for the deaf, and my step parents did as well. So I grew up, I went to a residential school for the deaf. I did go to a mainstream school, to a public school as a single deaf person for a short amount of time. But then I also went to Gallaudet University. So I was very much within the deaf world, in my own little fishbowl, if you will. And it wasn't until starting to work at Western Oregon University, where I recognized that most of my life I had just been surrounded by other deaf individuals. And here I was out of my element because I was working with many other people who were hearing and who didn't know very much about what my experience was. So it really forced me to roll up my shirt sleeves and address some of my own unique situation, and then combat some of the inequities that I was confronting.
Thank you for sharing. And on a different, but will also come around to it being a similar note, we know that the word feminism is a very charged word. It can hold a lot of weight, and it is also tailored to specific people who identify as feminists. So we're wondering what your personal definition of feminist is, and if you identify as such.
Yeah. I think that it's an important term to even consider. I fully embrace feminism and being a feminist myself. Um, I see it defined most broadly as leaders who are women who have really led the charge for great advancements. We see that in protests and in movements, and we see that a lot of those fights that they fought for us in the past have resulted in some of what we have now. Growing up, I know that I didn't have too many women role models, although I did have a coach that was female and very strong, and I really wanted to emulate that. My phys ed teacher, my principal at school, but I didn't really hear a whole lot of talk of the word feminism and feminist. And I think that might have just been a sign of the times when I was growing up. However, there were definitely women who I saw as just strong leaders and role models, and those who were at Gallaudet or who were in the Deaf Olympics. And I saw them and wanted to emulate their leadership skills. And then also throughout my own development, just trying to develop my own connection to the term and pass that on to other people so that they too can just look to me as a leader in my own right.
That's really interesting. Specifically that you talk about feminism and also being a really strong role model. Being a strong role model, is really important, especially today. And we're wondering if being a feminist impacts your teaching at all. And also if you see feminism and your identities as being a deaf individual, how do those intersect, or do they?
Ah, yeah, good questions. It's after many years of trying to navigate my own identity and understand those pieces of intersectionality, develop confidence in who I am, that I've finally come to realize that, yes, I don't need to parse apart those pieces of my identity. They very much do intersect. And that took many years to understand. Oh, and I am sorry, just a moment. Okay. My class was still running, so I had a student that had popped up, sorry. So the question again, I was thrown off. Can you give me the question again? I apologize, do you mind?
how does being a feminist affect your teaching, and how does feminism and being a deaf individual with a capital D intersect?
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. My identity, I see that being deaf and being a woman, there is intersectionality there. And then also an instructor at Western. It depends on where you are as far as what aspects of your identity you're able to put on display. For example, when I'm around students, fortunately, there aren't too many deaf students at Western. We have proportionally quite a number of hearing compared to deaf students at Western. And so, yes, I am deaf. However, because there's such a small population, I am first perceived as a woman, and I also am a lesbian. And so all three of those identities really do intersect. I think, number one, I am just as authentic as I can be. Just, I always tell myself just to be myself. And I wouldn't want someone to parse apart my identity, but just to be exactly who I am as the instructor. I I know that there's typically quite a huge distinction between someone where they are as a person and then where they are in their profession, and they show two different faces. But I very much want to find that middle ground where people feel as though they can connect with me as a person, even as an instructor. So that really has been my experience at Western over the years, and just being able to connect with people. And it's something that I feel very proud of. And the interpreters are going to switch.
All right, thank you so much for talking about your time at Western. And we were wondering, in terms of Western, do you feel like the ASL program is represented equitably? And if not, do you feel like it's dominated by certain groups? And then what perspectives are therefore missing because of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ASL Studies program at Western. It's such a unique place. We have an opportunity to have deaf professors leading that program. And thinking back to my first day there back in about 2009, 2010, we did have a few teachers who were teaching ASL who were not deaf. And that's really a hot topic in today's world, that it's quite controversial for a hearing person to teach ASL, and it is considered to be more appropriate for deaf individuals to be teaching their own language. And over the years here at Western, we did end up having a fully deaf faculty in the ASL program. And that's highly to be sought after. It's quite rare across colleges and universities that have ASL programs. So that's really wonderful to see at Western. What's missing, the other perspectives that are missing are BIPOC voices. We haven't had a lot of representation in racial diversity, and that has to do with our history, both locally and nationally, where teachers come from, what systems future teachers come through to become teachers. So I think that we definitely are missing that diversity amongst the deaf teachers.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you just touched on deaf history a little bit, but we just wanted to comment on how, especially this year, people are sort of waking up from this like ignorant bliss and realizing how many marginalized communities, the deaf community specifically, have been like silenced throughout history. And something that has been neglected in history books is the 100-year ban of ASL, which is something that I, nor Maya, am super familiar with. So we were wondering if you would be able to elaborate and speak a bit to that history.
Sure. ASL was officially recognized as a language in the 1960s by a white non-deaf man. And he was the one to really discover that ASL is its own unique language. In 1960s, that's quite a late discovery. We have historical records that identify that ASL has been a language for much longer than that. And others had fought for that recognition, but it took a hearing white man to bring it to pass. And it's still been a struggle even since then. But going back further than 1960, Alexander Graham Bell is very well known for the invention of the telephone. But less well known is that A.G. Bell also had a deaf wife, and she was forbidden to use sign language. So at that time, deaf people were required to lip read and learn to speak as well as they could. And Alexander Graham Bell was a part of that. He wouldn't allow his wife to learn to sign. And that started a long history of this oppression of sign language and this focus on lip reading and speaking for deaf people. And they call that oralism. Then when William Stokey identified American Sign Language as a true language, that started a shift. So before Stokey, oralism was very strong. And my mother was raised in that time, actually. She was raised lip reading and trying to speak until she was about 12 years old. And then she went into a residential school for the deaf where she started learning sign language. My father went into a deaf school much earlier, at about age 5. But oralism has a long history and has had a great impact on our country and beyond. That movement started back in the 1880s. And at that time, people didn't understand that American Sign Language was a true language. They didn't think that it was equivalent or equal to English. And prior to recognition of ASL as a full language, educators were really focused on giving deaf children access to English. And so they would invent sign systems to represent English manually and visually. And so even when ASL then became recognized as a separate language from English, there was this stigma towards it and this value more on these sign systems that represented English. And we see a lot of children then being raised with these invented sign systems and struggling through them because they weren't given access to ASL. My own brothers were raised in school with signed exact English. It's this invented system. And they really struggled to learn to access their education through that. And then only later gained access to ASL as their second language. And many people who experience that and learn ASL later as their second language, it becomes their primary language. And so they continue to use that for the rest of their life. And it didn't really become clear that these invented sign systems were not effective until about the 1980s. And so this signed exact English then started to phase out, and education shifted over more into a bilingual, bicultural model. And that's really been improving deaf education over the last several decades. But we can see that history and the impact it's had on current generations, right? As we look at the older generations who were raised with oralism, the next generation's raised with signed exact English and signed English, and then this newer generation that's coming up through bilingual, bicultural models, we can see that history being lived out even today.
Many of us don't know that history. I know we say it all the time, so thank you again for being willing to talk about that. Um, Through that history, I think we can better appreciate the world we live in today, such as you mentioned, we have a deaf and hard of hearing university in Washington, D.C., Gallaudet University, which is really popular. And we noticed on your website that it looks like you have a bachelor in science in psychology. So we were wondering if you could talk about that experience as a student and how that specific psychology program helped shape you into the intellectual and professor you are today.
Yeah, I will be forever grateful to Gallaudet because it really did impact who I am today. I think back to my early 20s, my experiences in life, my perspective of life was so dramatically different. Gallaudet did teach me academic information, right, through textbooks, but I learned so much also through all kinds of other experiences. There's a lot of different areas of psychology that you can work with in the deaf community. Oftentimes we think of psychology and that's related to mental health. And I think of so many things that come up today that remind me of experiences I had at Gallaudet, what I learned at Gallaudet. One course that really stuck with me was abnormal psychology. That class had a huge impact on me, and it impacted the way that I see the world around me. And then I became a teacher as a female, as a woman, working in the deaf community, a professor at Western. All of that plays into who I am. Even just recently, I taught a course that is a psychology course, and I was talking with 20 students about psychology, and the class was run in ASL. And it was fantastic to discuss psychology, deaf mental health, all of these things in my own language. And I couldn't be a psychologist, but it's so fun. You know, everywhere psychology is interwoven throughout all of everything you do. So I'm incredibly grateful to Gallaudet.
That's really so interesting. I'm a psychology major, and I'm currently taking a psychopathology class, which used to be called abnormal psych, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So, and we also were noticing as we were
got a new name now.
As we were reading your faculty bio that you teach a course called Deaf Women, Sociolinguistics, Historical, and Contemporary Issues. And in lieu of that, we were wondering, how has gender evolved over the years, and how has it affected your life and then your teachings within the classroom?
Yeah, I taught that class a few years ago. It's not been an ongoing course. Our schedules change. Other courses come in, and I know some of my other colleagues have been teaching that course, and I'm a bit jealous. I'd like it back. But it's such a great class. So my mother, my stepmom, their experiences as deaf women growing up in a residential school for the deaf, and my experiences also at a school for the deaf, are so completely different. They've passed down stories to me that have been very powerful. And I think it's important for the deaf community to be aware of that history. But at the same time, at the same time, it's good for the deaf community to know about that history, but I also want to expose my Western students to that history. My mother was really trained vocationally in her school. So at that time, schools for the deaf were very heavily emphasizing vocational training, developing those hands-on skills, working at home, working in a salon, becoming a cook, a chef, those kinds of things. And the academics were pretty minimal for women, right? So those educational classes, those core classes were more focused for the boys. And it was that hands-on home eccy vocational work for the girls. As time has gone on, that's become more equivalent, or that those academic courses have been broadened to girls, but vocational training in general has really lapsed. And so when I grew up, coming out of school, there were a lot of skills that I didn't know. And I had to rely on my mom and stepmom for these basic kind of life skills that they had learned from school and that I had missed in my education. However, in my education, I got that academic training. And that led me into a world of research and led me to where I am today. And so now there's this issue of elitism. And people will talk about, oh, these deaf women who are in this elite class in academia and research, and that's me. But I also look at my mom and my stepmom and see the critical nature of the history that they have to share with us. And so both groups bring important parts to the whole. Coming back to gender, I do identify as a woman, but I also don't, as it were. It's more of a continuum, right? So there are these gender role ideas where the girls stay at home and they cook and they clean and they are in the home, right? Those are more old-fashioned ideas. And the girls don't go out and get jobs. They don't go out into academia. And that's still at play today, right? Those gender roles are still there, and I don't fit into that mold. And so in discussions of gender, it is more complex and more nuanced. But I don't fit into those gender roles, but I do consider myself a feminist, and I love feminist history, and I do identify as a woman. So there's those complexities and that tension between these different ideas, between modern ideas and historical ideas, and all of them are important to consider. Interpreters will switch.
So I know you've mentioned, class identities, gender identities, and identities related to sexual orientation. And I completely agree that a lot of those ideas are very nuanced and, exist along a spectrum. But we were wondering, do you feel that any other identities you have affect how you present your coursework apart from the identities you've already mentioned?
No, I think what it all comes down to is just experience. So much of teaching is wrapped up in identity, sure, but it's also my life experience that I bring to the classroom. And so, yeah, that's really what shows up. Most honestly, yeah, I now possess 3 different degrees, and all of them are representative of my experience. Thank you for clapping. But yeah, even, one class is different from another when I'm teaching. And so I like to draw a common thread, and that common thread really is just the experience that I bring to the table. And yes, my identities do pop up in there.
Speaking of classes, COVID has been crazy for online classes and such. But in ideal circumstances, are there any courses you would love to see added to the ASL program? Or if you could teach the class of your dreams, what would it be?
Ooh, teaching a class or taking a class? Teaching? Teaching. Huh. I really enjoy teaching the mental health in the deaf community class. I love that. I would teach that more and more if I could. But if there was another class that I could create, I have my master's in outdoor education. And so if there was something like that, actually, no, not really. I mean, maybe a course on the psychology of LGBTQIA. I have a book that would just be wonderful for a class like that. I mean, I maybe I could teach that class someday after I were to really feel invigorating. Yeah, sure.
So then to flip it then, is there a class that you would like to be the student in?
Oh, criminal justice. Yeah, yeah. And history. I really enjoy history. Uh, I These have become interests that have developed much later. And it was actually while I was going through my Ed D program, and I developed this passion for history. Before, when I was at Gallaudet, I dropped history classes 3 times. And for the 4th time, I finally took the class and I made it through the term. But now I really enjoy learning history and putting all the pieces together. And then also criminal justice. I see the relation to criminal justice and psychology. And previously, I didn't really make that connection, but now I can see where they intersect, and it gets my wheels turning, and I start thinking about just all of the other implications. So it was while I was going through my doctoral studies that I developed these interests, just so that I wasn't stuck in the monotony of studying.
That's really so interesting. And I wanted to say that I think an LGBTQIA psychology class at Western would be awesome. I transferred from Portland State University and I took a class there on that. And it was wonderful. So I wish Western also had that resource. And so to circle back to feminism for our last question here, we were wondering if you have a feminist icon and who they are.
No, there are too many. There's so many feminists that I look up to in a multitude of ways. Here, I'm wearing a shirt with a whole bunch of different female icons. And I've watched documentaries on almost all of them. It's just everyone has their own inspiring story. Most recently, I've actually been watching the WNBA, And I've seen the NCAA and the coaches there, how they're really encouraging youth and those female ball players. And then I've seen just the heavy emphasis that the WNBA and their players have had on social justice, and been really touched by that. And then now with the NCAA, there are a couple. There's Dawn Staley and Addie Barnes. Both of them are coaches, and I just watch them because they are just strong female leaders, and if I were fortunate enough, I would love to meet them someday. But to be honest, there are just so many feminist icons that I look up to. I wouldn't be able to name just one. There are just so many.
Well, thank you so much. And I think Maya and I agree, because I don't think we could probably choose either. There's just too many. But that is our last question. So that wraps up our recording today. So we just wanted to thank you, Kara, so much for being here with us. And also thank you so much to the interpreters for being here, and just bringing, visibility to Western's ASL department that I don't think Abby's House has brought in the past.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for making this happen.